All right, hey everybody, I'm Chris, and I'm going to be talking today about automation for localization. I've got a lot of sort of tips and tricks to automate different automation workflows. There'll be lots of links to gists with code and code snippets. I've already published the slides to this on the Discord channel for presentation slides, so don't worry if you miss any of those links. Quick about me, I live in Nara, Japan. Before that, I'm from Vermont in the United States. Professionally, my background is as a software engineer, and I worked at these 4 companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. But I quit my job in 2018 to become an indie app developer. So I now make a living off of 2 apps. The first one is called Nihongo, which is a modern Japanese dictionary and study tool. And the other one, which I published last year, is called Nihongo Lessons, which is an app for actually sort of teaches you Japanese. I'm mostly going to be talking about Nihongo today. Nihongo supports 8 different languages: English, French, Spanish, German, Dutch, simplified Chinese, traditional Chinese, and Russian. And you might wonder why you should localize your app. And it turns out for me, as an indie app developer, it's been a huge part of making my app business sustainable. It's something I can live on. So Nihongo, this is a breakdown of Nihongo revenue by country. About 31% is the United States. And if we actually break it into just primarily English-speaking countries and primarily non-English-speaking countries, it's about 39% of my revenue comes from English-speaking countries. Oops, sorry. And 61% from non-English-speaking countries. And you might wonder if those sales would have happened even if the app wasn't localized. So I thought I'd share with you just I looked at the revenue that my app brought in the year before I localized into each country's primary language and the year after. So in Germany, my sales went up 355% the year over year from the year before I localized in German to after. China was 288%, Mexico 174%. Spain I didn't have any sales before, and now it went up to $200. France 214%. Taiwan, a whopping 909% when I translated into traditional Chinese. Hong Kong, 139%. Russia, 423%. The Netherlands, 3%. I don't know what's going on with the Dutch, but so that's why you should localize. But localization does take a lot of work, and especially if you want a high-quality localization. So every release, there's a lot of work not only to set up localization the first time, but also basically on every single release. So every release, I generate screenshots to assist my translators. I actually get translations for the new strings. I verify the layout and correctness of those translated strings. I generate App Store screenshots. And I translate release notes. So I'm going to walk through each of these and talk about how I use automation to help it so that me as a solo indie developer can maintain 8 high-quality localizations of my app. So let's start actually with number 2, with translating strings. And there are a few different kinds of translation. So there's professional translation, where you're paying a translation company or a translator to translate your app. There's machine translation, like Google Translate or ChatGPT, things like that. Crowd translation, maybe using your social network to provide translations. And I actually wanted to talk a lot more about this. I had a whole bunch of slides, but I absolutely could not fit it in. So if you want to talk more about this, feel free to ask me later. For the rest of the talk, I'll be focused just on professional translation and what you can do to automate yourself to be set up for professional translation. So for translating new strings, the first thing that you definitely want to do is make sure that your translation service is integrated with your Git repo. The translation company that I use, which is called Babylon, they use a platform called Crowdin. And Crowdin, if you use Crowdin, there's an integrations tab in here that you can go to and hook Crowdin up to your GitHub account so that every time you create new strings in your app, the translators will be notified of that. They can start working on that immediately if they want. And every time you get new translations back from your translators, and this is maybe even more important, every time you get translations back, it will automatically create a new branch in Git with those translations, which you can then have your continuous integration set up, your CI server, kick off a new app build with those translations and different, any UI tests or different tests that you want on those, on that branch. So that's definitely really important. My experience, at least with Crowd-in, was that using xlifs, the format that Apple introduced in Xcode maybe 5 years ago, where you actually can export your strings to xlifs and hand them off your translators, and then they'll hand you back an xlif file with the translations. I actually found that got in the way more than it helped. So I used just straight .strings files that I check into my Git repo, and Crowd-in will automatically update with new .strings files in each language. Xcode also added string catalogs in the latest version of Xcode with the .xc strings files. I think those look great. I have not adopted those yet, so most of what I'll talk about today is focused still on using .strings files, but there's a lot that should carry over. So first, so the next step is talking about generating strings files from your code as part of continuous integration. And the main tool that you want to use here is a tool called genstrings. And this is something that Apple ships with Xcode. It's a command line tool, and in its basic form, you pass it the name of a file, and it looks for all the occurrences of ns-localized string in the file, and it'll output to a .strings file, and it'll output in the format expected by a .strings file. So it will take the comment section of the ns-localized string and move it into this /* comment syntax in the strings file. It will take the text of your ns-localized string and put it both on the left and right side of this key value pair here. And the way translation works is then you'd pass off this English localizable.strings to your translators, and they create a version of this in each language where now meanings would stay the same on the left here, but on the right they'd put the translation into each individual language. There's also a -SwiftUI argument you can pass to this, which lets it also pick up on things like the text view in SwiftUI. And it'll pretty much do exactly what you expect, the same thing, putting that into a localizable.strings file. So in order to actually run this across your entire project, this is it might look like a complicated command, but this is a shell script that will use the bash find command to find all of the .m and .swift files, so all the Objective-C and Swift code in your app, pass each of those file names through to the genstrings command, and passes that -SwiftUI argument that I told you about. And then -A just tells it to actually append to a single file, so you end up with one localizable.strings file at the end with all the strings from every file in your project. So that's generating strings files from your code as part of continuous integration. Next up, generating strings files from storyboards. My app is 10 years old, so and I went all in on storyboards, so it definitely still has lots of storyboards. And the path for getting strings out of those is kind of similar to genstrings. There's a cool tool called IBtool, and it has this argument export strings files, which takes the name of the strings files you want and a path to a storyboard file. And it'll, similar to genstrings, it will generate that localizable.strings file. You'll run this once for every single storyboard that you have, and it generates so you have a separate strings file for each storyboard. One thing to note that I think is kind of an interesting omission on Apple's part is that in something like SwiftUI, you have the verbatim initializer for a text, which lets you say, hey, this string doesn't need to be translated. And it won't be picked up by genstrings and put into the .strings file. For storyboards, there's no really good built-in support for that. So I did build something here where to kind of hack this in, which is in the place that you normally put your localizer hint, which is the comment for the string, write the text DNL, which is supposed to be short for do not localize. And then if you run this command, which is right after that IBtool command, this will basically search for all the places, all of the strings that had this DNL localizer hint, and it will remove those from the .strings file so that you can not have a consistent way to not pass those off to your translators. Okay, so that's generating strings from storyboards. Next up, let's talk about app descriptions. So app descriptions, you might think that you might just have your app description and you hand that off to your translators and you ask them to translate it into each individual language. In my case, I actually had some subtle variations I wanted for each different language. So originally, I created an app description English, app description German, app description French, where I would include each individual, maintain these different app descriptions for each one, but 99% of it is shared across all of them. So I developed a script that will help me manage this and have one single source of truth for my app description. So for this case, this app description source.txt, anything that's just on its own will be in all app descriptions. So the first line, Nihongo is an offline Japanese dictionary, flashcard app, and reading assistant designed to make the best use of the time you dedicate to studying Japanese. That'll appear in all the different languages. But then in English, I want it to say over 180,000 words and 6,000 kanji entries. But in German, I want it to say over 115,000 native German definitions and 6,000 kanji entries. So at this gist here in this QR code, you'd find a script that you can run on a file like this, and it detects these little tags that kind of look like HTML tags or XML tags or something. And it will generate from this an app description English, which will only include anything not in any of these brackets and the English section, an app description German, which would include this first line, and the section in DE, which is the language code for German. So this is a good way that you can have a single source of truth. This doesn't do the translation itself, to be clear. This is just generating sort of a source file that you can then hand off to your translators so that you can have different app descriptions in each language. The next thing I want to talk about is using Apple's translations where possible. So here's a screen in my app. And there's some text in here that use really standard system vocabulary, like save, paste, clear, search, settings. And I highly recommend that you use Apple's strings for these common system vocabulary. If you hand these off to your professional translator, they might not be deeply familiar with exactly what the right terminology that Apple uses for each of these things is. So I suggest that you supply these strings directly and don't ask your professional translator. And Apple actually publishes, or they did publish, they haven't in a couple of years now, but they publish glossary files on developer.apple.com/download. They publish glossary files that include all of their strings, including localizer comments, and you can see for every app that Apple publishes, all of the strings that they have in them translated in all the different languages. But it's the glossaries are really hard to use directly. So I built a tool for this, which you guys can check out later, called Glossary Lookup. And with Glossary Lookup, here's an example. You give it a word, in this case paste, and it will print out all the translations found for the given word in each language, along with how many occurrences of that translation were found. So in this case, I look up paste, and in German, every single place that paste shows up in Apple's apps, it's translated as einsetzen. But Russian, it shows up 11 times as this one word and 1 time as this other one. So if you find a word and you see that it translates the same way in all different languages, or it's always translated the same way, great, go ahead and use it. If there are variations, you might want to dig into what the localizer comments are for that string, figure out what context they're using it in, and make sure you're picking the translation that matches the context that you're using that word in. OK, so that's using Apple's translations. And all of that is translating new strings. So if you guys want, I put my entire code for all these steps that I listed here I just published my build localizations shell script that does all of those things. So afterwards, you can go and look at that, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I'm happy to help. And that was translating new strings. So next, I'm going to talk about these two as a pair, generating screenshots to assist translators, and verifying the layout and correctness of translated strings. Because if we automate the creation of the new screens in our release, we can use them both to provide really excellent context to our translators, and then also use them to quickly verify the layout and correctness of our text, translated text, after we get translations back. So we use UI tests for this. And this isn't to talk about UI tests, so I'm not going to dive too deep into this. But say I have code that is a function navigate to word entry for hanasu. And then you can run this command that will take a screenshot of the screen, xeui screen.main.screenshot.image.png.data.write to an output URL. So you can run these UI tests, and in English you'll get something like this. This is a screenshot from my app of a dictionary entry for the word hanasu. And one of the really cool things that the platform Crowdin that I'm using lets you do is you can upload this screen to Crowdin and then hit this little magic wand, and it will actually search the screenshot and match it against your .strings files and find all of the occurrences of any words that are in your .strings file in the screenshot and automatically attach them to each other. So after this, say we're looking at this word common in the top right. When the translators are going through and get to the word common, they'll see this screenshot of exactly how it appears in the app right next to it. And that helps them to give the exact right kind of translation based on how it's appearing in the app, how much space there is, everything like that. And then you can use that same UI test afterwards that generates a screenshot. Once you get that, your translations back, and it creates that branch for you in Git automatically, and you have your CI automatically kick off another UI test build, which automatically generates this screenshot for you. You can then look at this and just skim through all the screenshots and identify, hey, there's a bug here. In German, this text for common, which I've been told is pronounced geläufig, is now getting cut off. So I can go in, and in this case, clearly there's plenty of room here for this string, so this is my bug. And I can fix that bug, kick off another round of the screenshots, and make sure that it's fixed. And so sometimes I'll find bugs this way, or find things that I just need to go back to the translators and say, hey, can you make this shorter? Or hey, this doesn't seem quite right, something like that. It can find those as well. OK, so that's these two, generating screenshots to assist translators and verifying layout and correctness of translated strings. Next, I'll talk about generating App Store screenshots. So the problem here is that Apple allows you to have 10 screenshots for your app. If you're supporting iPhone and iPad, there's 4 different device types that you need to upload, a minimum of 4 different device types you need to upload screenshots for. Nihongo supports 8 languages, so already that's 320 screenshots. Yeah, and here's all of my screenshots in Finder. So maintaining this on your own is going to be really painful, especially if you want to keep those screenshots updated with your modern app interface, or if you want to add new languages. Automating this, I mean, is almost required in order to do that. So the basic setup that I recommend starting with is using Fastlane. Fastlane has great tooling for this. They're called Snapshot, to take the snapshots, frame it to put them in device frames, and deliver to upload them to App Store Connect. So yeah, we create UI tests that navigate to the screens that you want, just like I showed before. Use Fastlane Snapshot to automate taking the screenshots across all the languages. Use Fastlane Frame It to put the screenshots into device frames and add titles. And use Fastlane Deliver to actually upload those screenshots to App Store Connect. And this is the kind of thing that you'll get. These are the screenshots for Nihongo. So it's got the modern app interface that it automatically puts into a device frame and puts some text on top of it, nice background and shadows and things like that. But sometimes you might find that Fastlane doesn't quite do everything that you want. I found this for this screenshot that I wanted for Nihongo. And the thing to highlight here, the thing to look at, is this part at the bottom where there's a handwritten kanji when you're writing this flashcard. And so what I really want to do here is I want to have the screenshot on the left here, the latest modern interface from my app that I don't want to have to retake every time that I update my app, and have this one file that's just a handwritten kanji. And I want to merge them into a single thing, put them in a device frame, and add the text. And unfortunately, this isn't something that Fastlane supports out of the box. And there's plenty of other things like this that you might come across. So it turns out that Fastlane Frame It is actually built under the hood with a tool called ImageMagick. And if you aren't familiar with ImageMagick, It's a command line tool for doing various like image manipulation. You can combine images, do different blend modes. You can do add text into it, do automatically changing text sizes, doing different fonts, things like that. I'm not going to dive into this script at all, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. It's a fairly esoteric and complicated thing. It's been around for like 25 years. But it's really powerful and is a great way if you want to do some advanced things with your screenshots. Okay, very last section here is translating release notes. So here's some release notes from Nihongo. I am not a minor bug fixes and improvements kind of guy, as you might be able to tell. Like, I play MMORPGs, I play Final Fantasy XIV, and every time there's new release notes, like, I want to read every little thing. So I bring that to my apps too. And to support this, I have put together a system where I have 3 text files. One on the left is called majorfeatures.txt. The one in the middle is called otherimprovements.txt. And the one on the right is called bugfixes.txt. And I put one item on each line, and then run this command, release notes generator.generate. And it puts together this nice release notes that I show here. But even cooler is that it'll also generate it in all of my different languages. For the major features, I actually have professional translation for this text, and so it automatically uses that professional translation. And everything else, it automatically machine translates, because I'm not going to pay for the machine or for professional translation of all of these. So if you want to check that out and see how I do that, I've also got a gist here of that. Okay, in summary, good localization is more than just translating strings. It's possible to support lots of high-quality localizations, even as an indie developer. Most localization tasks can be automated. And feel free to use or adapt any of the code shared in this deck. I'm not publishing these as open source projects. I don't have the bandwidth to support that, but I did want to share all of this work that I've done with you guys. And if you have any questions or anything, I'm happy to help. ご清聴ありがとうございます。今日は英語で発表したんですけど、日本語も全然大丈夫ですから、質問あったらぜひ聞いてくださいね。Thank you very much.